Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Try a Story Tag video for July 2024. The Try a Story Tag was something that Jen Campbell brought to BookTube years ago. And the point was to pick out a stack of short story collections, read the first short story from each, and then decide which one would join your TBR. But that's not the way I've been playing this game for years in July, which I do this in July because I write short stories and enjoy them, and July is my birthday month. But anyway, each July now for several years, I've been slowly reading through a handful of collections, a couple of collections, and then I'll end with a brand new collection, which hopefully I'll continue with and actually finish this month. But in the meantime, I'm here to eke through a few collections and share some thoughts about the stories I read this year with you. So I'm starting with the Vintage Book of Contemporary American Short Stories, edited by Tobias Wolff. And this year I've read a Raymond Carver story called Cathedrals. And in this story, we're in the perspective of a married man whose wife has invited her blind friend, as he's referred to, or the blind man, over to stay with them after he's lost his wife. Back 10 years ago, before the man who was the main character knew his wife, neither of them are named really, she was engaged to someone else and needed some money when her former fiance was in officers training. So she answered an ad in a newspaper from the blind man named Robert to read to him, basically. And they struck up a friendship. And then they started sending each other's tapes back and forth for the next several years, including when the woman's marriage and life with her first husband was falling apart. And so this blind man, Robert, her friend, really, I think, took on an outsized role in her life. And meanwhile, Robert himself married and then now has ultimately lost his wife and is in the area to meet up with in-laws, and the woman offers for Robert to stay in their home. And our main character, the protagonist, finds this a bit jostling, I suppose. It feels like it's obvious that the undertones are, that his wife has this deep friendship with another man. And of course, there's like this implicitness about that he can't actually be all that emotionally open or available about any of this, so he just has to be freaked out and not really delve into anything other than sort of his he centers a bit on, he's being freaked out that this man is blind, and how do you talk to a blind person, and there's just a littleness in this. And it's also, it comes up also when he assumes maybe that the man's wife was a Negro, which dates the story, of course, and also just, talks of a smallness that the main character, I feel like, just accepts within himself a bit when dealing with other people. But anyway, the man ultimately, Robert, who's mostly in this story referred to as the blind man, he does come and he stays, and it's, I think, supposed to, display the awkwardness that the main character feels around him, that he's not able to speak with him, and his wife mostly handles the conversation, and he's just sort of freaked out entirely that a man could live his life without seeing, which I guess, to be fair, for those of us who do have this ability, sight for most human beings is our primary sense for understanding the world. But anyway, they have a big, sort of seems like stomachache inducing meal. They drink a lot, and then they get into smoking some dope. And I guess that's loosening them up a little bit. And this story does ultimately end with the wife kind of passing out, and it seems like the blind man and the protagonist are slowly able to try to forge a connection. This blind man, I think, is used to people being put off by him and his disability, and wants to understand the world around him as best he can, and talk to people. And And so they're watching television and they're on this channel where, it's a historical program about cathedrals. And at first, the protagonist is, going into the, pseudo-philosophical, oh my God, does he even know what a cathedral is? And the blind man is encouraging our protagonist to describe it and then draw it. And it feels like that's kind of opening up a new world of sensation for the main character to sort of understand the world and connect to this other character. And then it kind of, I feel like, ends abruptly there. It feels like, a story that in a way is more contemporary. Contemporary stories get the bad rap of like ending in the middle. And maybe this story reached, its point by that point, that yes, our protagonist was able to try to make a connection, but it still feels a little abrupt in its way. But overall, I would say that I did enjoy this story, even as I was judging the smallness of this character. I suppose it's a rather believable smallness of character. In this collection, Great Short Stories by American Women, edited by Candace Ward, we have gotten up to an Edith Wharton story, which is kind of exciting on its own. I really came into reading Edith Wharton at the end of high school when I was accepted into my college because I went for the English and creative writing programs, and the college's literary house's cat at the time I was a student was named Edith Wharton. So anyway, I guess that's a weird preamble to talk about The Angel at the Grave, this short story in this collection, because, it has that stuffy reportage style that short stories of the age often had. I remember enjoying Wharton's novels, but this one took a little bit more for me to get into because it was a bunch of, long, stuffy paragraphs and very little, like, action, in-person action or dialogue or scenes. But anyway, it's the story of Paulina Anson, who spends her life basically in the shadow of her dead and slowly being forgotten grandfather Orestes Anson. He was known as some sort of great philosophical and scientific thinker of his day. He spawned some anti-intellectual children, as it were, and then Paulina came to age and sort of saw herself as the keeper of his estate and lived in his house, which, had the capital H, and was seeing over basically his legacy, to the point where she even turned down a marriage proposal because the fiance wanted to take her away from the house and basically, bring her to his own home and, she'd become a wife and yada yada. But instead, she dedicated decades of her life, up until her 40s, to writing this account of her grandfather. And by that time, she emerged out into the world, and the new publisher at the publishing house where she might have gotten a deal said, he's just not that important anymore. If people want to know about him, maybe they'll just look him up in the dictionary, which did sort of amuse me, made me think of, in today's parlance, I guess it would be, we don't need a book, a huge tome on someone, we could just look them up on the internet on Wikipedia. So anyway, basically she is a bit, Paulina's kind of shattered by this, because now this has been her life, keep being the legacy keeper of this man whose star has officially dimmed, and so with it her star is basically dimmed, and she has little to show for her life until a last minute twist of fate, where I guess by this point she's not paying much attention when a visitor comes to the door wanting to write an article on her grandfather and some old treatise of his that's sort of been refound or reevaluated, like back in the day, or when Orestes was trying to make this scientific proposition. The powers that be weren't all that interested in it, but then, I guess academia finally changed, and the wheel keeps moving, and, when maybe forgotten people can be rediscovered. So it ends on a hopeful note that she's going to help him research her grandfather and this particular, part of his past, and I guess hopefully it'll give her life some meaning, because otherwise it's kind of sad to think that she labored in the shadow of someone's research that ultimately the rest of the world doesn't necessarily think is important. And maybe it would have been okay if she would have gotten just, if she would have gotten happiness from it alone, but that doesn't seem to be the case either. She needed some extra validation. And as for me, I think I just needed a little more of a propulsive story. I guess I like the idea of it, but it's not like I could really feel for the characters with this level of stuffy writing. I'm back to My First Love Affair and Other Short Stories by Sholem Aleichem. And this one I've read, There's No Dead, is very short and very satirical. And it has an unnamed narrator who actually doesn't do much but observe, so I guess he is off the hook a little bit. But he's at the graveyard in the town that a lot of these stories take place in, which is Kozrelevke. I wanted to make sure I was saying that right. But anyway, the man is going to a graveyard and he sees wailing relatives, mostly women it seems, stretching out over the graves. And what they're upset about basically is being abandoned by these people who, now have no worries. Well, they have to scrounge for money. They have sons who have to have Hebrew lessons for their bar mitzvahs. They have daughters who they have to have dowries for to marry off. And there's no money, and the dead, are at rest, and they're still suffering. And they look to the grave digger, who actually looks a bit spiffy in this story, it seems like, and they're just so jealous that he is doing so well for himself. But then our narrator goes to talk to him, and he has a million complaints too, which culminates in the saying, there's no dead in Kozrelevke. And what he means by that is the people who are dying are actually very impoverished, and so he's not getting much money for doing his job off of them. He's like, when's a rich person gonna die? There's no dead in Kozrelevke. So basically, it's a whole satire about how the living are moaning because the dead have it better off than them, I guess, and that they're just completely overtaken by their monetary concerns, and woe is me. And I think I might go ahead this year and go read another story from this collection as well, for the silly reason that this story began the month before the New Year, and the next story is named for Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, so I figure why not try to get ahead a little more in this collection. We'll see how it goes. Okay, I'm back, and this story is technically called Happy New Year, but it refers to Rosh Hashanah, which happens near the end of it. Anyway, there's a framing device in this story where the narrator is telling a bunch of people in a later generation about the feats of his grandfather Anshel, who spoke with the Tsar himself, Tsar Nick, as he's referred to, maybe the last Tsar Nick, not entirely sure. But he has a problem, and his town has a problem in terms of a man they name Mr. Big, or Buttons, which seems to be some sort of constable or something. I wouldn't actually know the official term myself, but within the Russian Empire, the Tsar went ahead and I guess employed these constable-like figures to overlook Jewish communities. And the narrator starts with comparing the first Mr. Big to King Ahasuerus, which is a reference to a foreign king in the Purim story who is able to sort of have his mind changed about the Jews around him and becomes a friend to the Jews, and that they can do good business with him, and basically it comes down to his hands can be greased. And that he takes bribes, and so they work well together, this first Mr. Big and the Jews. But then the next Mr. Big who replaces him is a Haman, or Haman, which is the villain of the Purim story, who very actively works against the Jewish population. And this Mr. Biggs does that by being a clean man, too good of a man who can't have his hands greased. So I guess that just leaves him to do his normal job, which in the context of this story is antagonizing Jews. He forbids any Jewish teachers from teaching. He seems to mess with Jewish holidays. He knocks wigs off of the heads of married women, and I guess this is supposed to be the norm, or what would be the norm, if all Mr. Biggs wouldn't be, coerced by some sort of, bribe or manipulation, and this Mr. Big won't. So they have a big problem in the community because the Jews are being antagonized. So the narrator's father is a man called Anshul, who has some Hasidic learning behind him. He leaves the town to go to a Hasidic rabbi, Hasidic rabbi. The Hasidim are a particular branch of the ultra-Orthodox, and then there's sub-branches. But anyway, he goes to the Rebbe for help, and the Rebbe, of course, knows everything, because that's the point of the Rebbe in this story. And he has a mystical sort of answer to how to take care of it. He says that Anshul should wait till the next fair day, which would be about a month before Rosh Hashanah. And first he confuses Anshul by saying Happy New Year, and he's like, what are you talking about? It's summer, it's not time for Rosh Hashanah yet. The Rebbe says, well, here's my plan. This fair day, a month or so before Rosh Hashanah, you buy these 2 absolutely perfect horses, and of course you have to haggle for them. You take them to a town that begins with P, and you have a regimen of prayer and rest for a few days, and then you take the horses strutting around, and the first sort of gentleman you see who asks, like, how much for the horses, you say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not a horse dealer, and then your problem is solved. So Anshul does all of this, and it takes a little while for something to happen, but then somebody from the Tsar's household, comes up to him asking, where'd you get those horses? And he does his whole I'm not a horse dealer. Anyway, there's, some back and forth between Anshul and the Tsar himself about what do you want. And it comes down to, we have this Mr. Big in town, and he's like, Mr. Big, what do you mean? Because that's just a word the Jews use for this man. But ultimately it comes down to, we need somebody who's a little more traditional, which means his hands can be greased and we all can get along a bit better. And so then Anshul, leaves the horses with the Tsar and goes home. And Mr. Big is replaced by a new Mr. Big whose hands aren't clean and whose hands can be greased. And that means that Jewish life is able to continue with a little bit of bribery and so forth. And that's the happy end of this story of what life was like, I suppose, in the Pale. Okay, and I'm finally here to talk about the collection I'll be continuing with. This is from A Calm Sea and Prosperous Voyage by Bette Howland. I actually highlighted this story as next on my TBR, as it were, back in May when I did a blog post about Jewish American short story collections, and I'll link that post down below. And now I'm finally going to start this collection, and it starts with a flash fiction called A Visit. And I guess, Bette Howland is apropos to talk about now, because most of the stories I've been reading in this tag have been historical. And Howland herself was a well-known writer in the 20th century, I guess mid to late-ish 20th century. So she's kind of in that milieu, I would say, and she's also a late writer now, and maybe that's an appropriate segue into the first flash fiction story in here, which follows a woman who is driving down an expressway. And there's a bit of a foreboding beginning where she misses her stop, and she's driving too fast and can't really get turned around, and there's a road with a lot of construction and a narrow passway and a car that comes and crashes into her. And so then she gets out of the car thinking she just has a little bit of tingling on her hand, and she runs into sort of a spooky mirage of people in like the underbelly of it seems like of a subway stop that isn't working. And they're all sort of muttering to themselves about certain things, and she's trying to get their attention to say she needs help. And then slowly it's dawning on her that, ooh, maybe I'm dead. And then the story takes a little bit of a turn, I feel like. The spookiness was more of an affectation, and it never got to perhaps full-on horror, because when she realizes she's dead, the first thing she starts thinking of is, can I reach out to my loved ones? And she starts addressing a you and trying to find you. So in a way, it's a little bit of a thematic turn for such a short piece. Like, I kind of respect what she's attempting to do. Like, with, trying to, create a sliver of supernatural reality and, what the afterlife might be like. And the narrator seems to think she's in a sort of purgatory. And it almost reminded me a little bit of Ghost, the movie, I suppose, just because, all the dead are also, in an urban setting. But in a way, flash fiction just is harder for me because it is more about vibes and less about, character study stuff that interests me more. So, an interesting start to reading this collection. I am definitely going to move on with it and report back in later videos. And on that note, that about covers it for me now, and I will leave Goodreads links for all of these stories down below and my short stories playlist as well. It's a nice little segue into a little short story reading. I do mostly read novels. And on that note, expect me back here again in the next few days where I'll do my next AM reading video of July. So I can hopefully get some more progress done on more of my reading before then. We'll have to see. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time.